Welcome to the Geek in Review, the podcast focused on innovative and creative ideas in the legal industry. I'm Marlene Gabauer.
And I'm Greg Lambert.
And today we welcome Sean West, co-founder of Hens Technologies and author of a new book, Unruly, Fighting Back When Politics and Law Upend the Rules of Business. Sean, welcome to the Geek in Review. Very excited to have you here.
I'm super excited. It's such a pleasure to be here. It's been on the bucket list.
Yeah, and for those of you on YouTube, you can see Marlene and I are actually in the same room together, sharing the same microphone. So get ready. Two people enter the octagon, but only one will leave. All right. So Sean, wanted to talk with you. I know this is going out the week of Legal Week. But one of the things that I just saw that crossed my desk this morning was this survey that Law 360 did that showed where like 62% of lawyers surveyed, and I think the metrics were 400 attorneys from large U.S. large law firms, but 62% of them say that they use ChatGPT for their, basically their legal work. And then it kind of drops off.
I wonder what that means, like their legal work. Like, what are they? What constitutes legal work?
Yeah, and I'm thinking, just to give just a little bit of background on this, is that it's the kind of the normal day-to-day stuff. So I don't think it's see if I can clear this frog out of my throat. I don't think it's their client stuff. I think it's kind of like, help me kind of phrase this right or do some research on this. But it's 62% use ChatGPT, and then it drops all the way down to like 28% for Lexis Protege.
Great.
Which I'm thinking that number may be high.
Yeah, it's of course geared directly to legal.
Yeah, and then the next one is Microsoft Copilot, and then the next one after that's Google Gemini. So. And then 17% use CoCounsel and 5% use Harvey. So I'm just kind of curious, what's your take with your experience about lawyers using commercial tools that are not legal focused, like ChatGPT?
Well, for me, I think there are a couple of pretty straightforward explanations for it, right? One is everyone's just decided that they're going to buy their own subscriptions to these AI platforms and use them and not go through central procurement, not go through central IT. They're going to use it on an iPad sitting next to their laptop. I mean, you see research about that. And so I think number one, you're not disintermediated by the system saying yes or no to using these tools. I think second, the price point is the reason for that, right? When it's $20 a month, it's like a couple pumpkin spice lattes or whatever you drink. Like, it costs nothing to have it. If it's useful once, you don't think that hard about the subscription that you have. You also get to feel like you're on the cutting edge because they're constantly pushing out new features and models. So I think a lot of people have taken the jump on it while their organizations are sitting back saying, we need to assess all these other tools and put them through the ringer. And by the way, those tools are actually kind of expensive. And so are we going to get the ROI and whatnot? Everyone's just said, look, I can have, a quarter of a human brain in my pocket or whatever it is. It's not full AGI yet, but I've got some amount of human capability in my pocket. Cost me nothing. I'm going to use that. Now, I think lawyers are, they're both smart enough to understand the limitations of it, but also their use case means that they're probably willing to accept some amount of risk because they trust themselves to catch the errors, right? I mean, we know AI is smart enough to pass the bar, but dumb enough to invent cases. And that's like kind of a problematic dynamic. If you had an intern that was the case with, they're probably not getting a full-time job. But I think lawyers who view themselves as editors, right, are willing to put things in and see what comes out and then decide what to keep and what not to keep and move on with it. There also may be some polling bias here too, where they don't want to name a particular tech product that they like, and so everyone just says ChatGPT when they're kind of overstating how much they're actually using it for legal work, because they probably are not using it as much as this says.
Well, yeah, and then the other thing is I had people that immediately responded was like, well, why are they using ChatGPT? Claude is so much better. I'm like, to most people, ChatGPT is the catch-all.
See, that's what I was wondering. Like, I don't know what the pool was here, but there's something to be said for branding. It's like everybody knows ChatGPT. They've heard that in the news multiple times. Maybe not so much as some of the other more common products. But and I also like, it's interesting with Microsoft Copilot. It's interesting with like Microsoft Copilot, ChatGPT, and Harvey, because it's like I mean I just know that Harvey has great penetration in large law, but yet that's really narrow. Whereas Microsoft Copilot, again, I don't know that many firms are using it yet. Maybe they are, but that is interesting in terms of the amount of people using that as compared to ChatGPT. You would figure if they did have access, they'd use that
Or I wonder
a lot
if
more.
that's a catch-all for Bing.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering, if it's Bing, like if that's what they mean.
Yeah, if their organization's a Teams organization, a Microsoft organization, and it's been enabled, then of course they're using it. It's been handed to them.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. One, I think this kind of reminds me of that argument where, as law librarians, there was a period of time where we're like, oh, please don't Google this. We pay millions of dollars for sophisticated legal research tools. Yeah. And quite frankly, there's times where it's fine. It's much better to use Google than it is to use Westlaw or Lexis. And so it just depends on what the issue is.
I think, we need to start thinking about the passive replacements of jobs through the use of these tools. That, like, people don't understand how reliant they are on these tools, and they don't understand the work they're not doing because they're using these tools. So I give a keynote now, and it has like one bold sentence and an AI generated image next to the bold sentence. And I flip through like 50, 60, 70 slides. And I always pause on a slide about like tech and its implications for the economy, because if you stop and reflect, like, that's a whole bunch of software licenses I didn't buy, right? I paid for one thing. I paid for ChatGPT. That's a designer. I didn't pay to design my slides. It's the intern who's not running between me and the designer trying to figure out what I'm trying to say. That's literally like me and a large language model eating jobs for some fraction of $20 because it didn't take me a whole month to do it. And I think that, like, we can get really deep in the conversation about whether AI will eventually replace high-level legal work or typical legal work. And then many people have discussed that. But I think it's this passive willingness to take that marginal query to an LLM instead of to a human that eventually we wake up and there's less work for humans to do without us realizing it. It's not necessarily a decision to offload it to AI. It's the fact that it's available and you use it that way. Are you going to ChatGPT for recipes instead of buying a recipe book today? Like, eventually we're probably going to realize that people are doing that. It was never an active decision by society that ChatGPT deserves 3 Michelin stars. It's just, it's simple, it's behavior, it's people trying it before they know it. They don't need the other product anymore.
Well, and the flip side to that is, instead of doing a presentation where you have 50 or 100 slides, you do a presentation where you do 4 slides. And because you're not, if you're like me, you weren't going to go pay for somebody anyway. You were just going to do less. And so this just enables me to take the same amount of time and content and create more information that I can put in that time and content period, because I'm too cheap. I wasn't going to pay for somebody to do that anyway.
Yeah, look, I think it's all different use cases, right? But it is pretty stunning just how much work these LLMs can do, because I think what you're highlighting with the data that you're showing, and I say this as a legal technology entrepreneur who builds apps and is regularly asked, what does this do that ChatGPT can't do, right? Like, that's just a common, like, knee-jerk reaction from anyone looking at
why do we need
new
this
technologies,
right?
Like, why can't I do this? The reality is these LLMs can do a ton. So when you're starting to see data that people are relying on it to do a ton, it also can make you question valuations for some of these tools that are competing with what a generalist AI can do. I tend to think, as fun as it is for lawyers to direct ChatGPT to do legal work, I don't think that that's why Sam Altman has built ChatGPT. I don't think that that's a case that that OpenAI is like particularly interested in owning, right? Like, do they want to own the legal space? But I do think for companies like Microsoft that have owned the enterprise, legal's a very easy adjacency for them to try and dominate. And I also think that when big companies like that get interested in it, and when lawyers start using it, then you get constituencies that want to change the regulations that prevent AI from actually practicing law. And that's where for me, and a big crux of the book, which I'm sure we'll get into, is about this intersection between politics, technology, and law. Like, when a lot of people use a certain technology, it creates a political momentum to allow them to use it for more things. And I think it's eventually going to lead us down the path of practicing law, and the rules will enable that, because the constituencies that want it will be different than in the past. And I think that's a different world we're headed into for legal work.
So, Sean, we're definitely going to get into the book and talk about this intersection that you're talking about. Tell us a little bit sort of about you and sort of how you got into this area.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm co-founder of Hence Technologies, a software company based in the US, the UK. We have people in the Netherlands, but primarily a base in Rwanda of engineers that build software both for legal tech for enterprises, and we have a new product, which we'll talk about, that does effectively geopolitical and geolegal analysis, which I'm pretty excited about. I spent most of my career as a political forecaster. I was deputy CEO of a company called Eurasia Group, a prominent geopolitical forecasting company. And when I left because I felt like the advisory world was going to get disrupted by technology, and I wanted to be a disruptor. And so I set up Hence with my co-founders, and we started off working on outside counsel management, because we felt like the purchasing of advice generally, not just in legal, was like a pretty interesting space. And legal raised their hand and said, we have this problem. We spend in-house, we spend a lot of money on legal advice. We don't know if it's good or bad. Can you solve that? And so we started working on it. And I suddenly found myself at a different legal conference every month. And I was walking around all these legal conferences. Before the generative AI, zeitgeist in the end of 2022, these conferences talked a lot about digital transformation and productivity enhancement. But suddenly everybody jumped to look at what AI can do and let's use it. And so you can't go to a legal conference where less than 60% of the agenda is about AI. Today it's probably like 90% of the agenda. And I sort of stepped back and I thought, with my political hat on, this is lawyers talking to lawyers about lawyering with AI, but nobody's actually answering the question about, number one, what's going to be allowed from a regulation point of view, not regulation of the legal profession, but regulation of AI, number one. Number two, it's great to make ourselves really productive, but what if we're super productive as the world melts down, right? What if we're in the presidential suite on the Titanic? That's kind of problematic, and nobody's sitting here doing speeches and talking about where the world is going. And, the world is being impacted, not just from, individual politicians, which we can discuss if you want, but really from a decline in rule of law globally, right? There are, 2/3 of the world has never really had access to justice. So to say that there's a rule of law recession sort of, I think, glazes over the fact that in most of the world, there's not necessarily rule of law and most people don't have access to their justice system. But in the Western world where we think we do, we are seeing very marked reductions in rule of law and access to justice. And that got me thinking a lot that not only is the legal community missing out on what's happening politically, but the political community also rarely thinks about the role that law and lawyers play in that process. They tend to think lawmakers are called lawmakers, so they make the law, and that's kind of the end of it. When in reality, we live in a world where the law is being weaponized, and where, when the political process fails, the only route you can go is to challenge things through the court. And so for me, kind of the origin of all of this was looking at the fact that I felt like there was a constituency in the legal community for understanding global events, geopolitical events, et cetera. And I wanted to test it out. So I set up a Substack and immediately got all this feedback. Initially it was the subtitle of it, the Substack's geolegal.substack.com, but the subtitle was helping lawyers look around the corner before it's too late. And I think, a bunch of lawyers opted in very quickly. We're yeah, I'd be happy to look around the corner. I suddenly said, okay, we're onto something here, right? The legal community is not getting this from other sources, because lawyers are they don't want to comment on politics. They'll tell you about a rule change, but they don't really want to talk about it. So it becomes a little edgy to actually have a view on where politics is going. And there was a space for that. So that's been, that's led us down the path where we've actually built product against that because of the interest. It's not like we did content marketing because we had a product that did this. It's like, oh, all these lawyers are saying, man, I can't do a horizon scanning. I can't keep track of what's going on in the world. My Google alerts are so much that I ignore all of them. Kind of like, okay, there's actually space to solve this problem for the legal community too.
Yeah, I have a hard time looking at my Google alerts and Google News.
Yeah, fair.
So, I mean, a few weeks ago, we had the vice president going over in Europe and talking at an AI safety conference about basically taking all the guardrails off and kind of holding back on regulations and letting the companies kind of, shoot forward. And then on top of that, we've got with all the stuff you talk about on your Substack with, like you said, pick your poison, the Ukraine issue, the Middle East issue, the NATO pact, tariffs that are going on, what's going to happen with supply chains. So there's all of this stuff going on. So, how do you even direct strategies for these tech companies to look at how they need to operate and what kind of resilience and risk mitigation and business continuity? How do you even try to throw a lasso around that?
Yeah, so there are a couple of ways to do this, right? If you're doing this with humans, you'd start by trying to figure out what are your main fail points and how are they politically exposed, and you'd build scenarios around that. The problem is that ends up being like a really nice exercise that ends up in a folder that goes on someone's shelf, and then everybody goes back to their real work, right? Because it's very hard to monitor it. Or you can bring in a whole bunch of corporate consultants who'll say geopolitical risk is this new thing. You should build resilience. And I wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago, there's no resilience button. There's no the easy button at Staples. You can't just hit build resilience. Building resilience is a whole lot of different things because the world is increasingly complex today. So the way I think about it really is starting to ask, particularly from a geolegal, intersection of geopolitics and legal perspective, starting to ask the legal questions early around political scenarios. I think that gets you a lot of leverage. So if you woke up tomorrow and China declared Taiwan had to follow mainland China law, everyone's worried about China invading Taiwan or blockading Taiwan. They could just wake up and say, it is illegal. You will not be able to do business in China if you don't honor the fact that Chinese law applies in Taiwan with your business in Taiwan. They said that, right? Lawyers would scramble and try and figure out, what are all the implications of this? Can I employ staff in Taiwan and in China? Do I have to pay them the same? You can do a lot of that stuff in advance, right? These are the same questions, whether they're asked before the event or after the event. So I think, a big lesson from Russia-Ukraine for a lot of companies was we saw Putin amassing troops on the border. We tended to take the position he won't go for it. When he did, we had to scramble and fire sale everything and make sure we were compliant with sanctions, but we saw it coming, right? So a big part of this for me is giving people situational awareness about what is in front of them and what is happening. I think this holy grail of prediction, I was a forecaster. I would run around, I would go on TV and say, who's going to win the election? What policy is going to pass, et cetera. It's not that you can't do that anymore, but the world's almost too complex to do that. There's too many moving parts to get that right. And as one AI pioneer told me, relying on AI for that is a bit challenging. We can't even predict whether you want to watch a 10th cat video after you've watched 9 of them. So predicting the entire world is a lot for AI. I think the fact is you can start to understand what's going on and react quickly when you see it in front of you. So we can see, for instance, the fracturing of the transatlantic relationship between the US and EU when it comes to military. That relationship leads to a fracture in foreign policy, right? If the US is suddenly going to say to Europe, hey, you're kind of on your own, go, good luck, right? We're not going to defend you. Well, then do we think that Europe is going to be nicer or meaner to US companies? Well, they're probably going to be meaner to US companies. And if they're going to be meaner to US companies, what's if it were a video game and Europe was a character in the video game, what's their secret weapon? When you enter the cheat code to get the secret weapon, their secret weapon is massive regulation. They break out the massive regulation, they direct it at the US. And I think you can foresee a lot of this stuff. So for me, a big part of this is about getting people into a mindset where we can't take a snapshot of what's going on in the world. You can't just look at the world and say, okay, I did my political analysis of entering this country. Job done, right? Great. Then you have to refresh this every month, every 2 months, every 6 months. The world is too dynamic. And so I think the US is a chaos agent in this world, but there are other chaos agents too. And the way those things interact mean you can't really anticipate it. You kind of have to be ready to react. And we can talk more about some strategies.
Well, and before let me just expand on that just a little bit, because like if I tell my kids if I try to explain what the rule of law means to my kids, I said, you know that a place adheres to the rule of law if at 2:30 in the morning you are at a stoplight and you watch a car pull up, stop, and wait even though there's nobody else around. They wait until the light turns green and then goes forward, even if they know there's not anyone watching them. And so I think, and it feels like we're losing that right now, that it's how do you act when nobody's watching? And you have that comfort of thinking that everyone around you is going to follow the rules. And it feels like that's somewhat disintegrating right
People
now.
are trying to get away with what they can,
Yeah.
Well, so there's a political answer to that and a technological answer to that, right? And as I sort of outlined, I think these three factors, politics, technology, and law, really, they're all exist on the same plane, and they're pulling in different directions. I think if you look politically, you can blame a lot on the Trump administration for this undermining of rule of law in terms of what's happened in the last 12 weeks. But this is a trend that I've been writing about, that we've been seeing more broadly in the US. I mean, yes, if people commit felonies and then are just like massively mass pardoned with no regard for whether they caused human injury or something like that, like that's probably not good for a belief that the legal system delivers fair outcomes, because, they are like being pardoned for political reasons. Or, if the mayor of New York City commits corruption and then decides that like he's suddenly happy to get behind the president's immigration policy, he's no longer got to worry about his court cases. Like that stuff's probably not good for rule of law. Like we can all see that, right? But the weaponization of the legal system to go after Trump, I think it's fairly mild, relative to the way that like Trump just went after Covington and Burling for defending the January 6th prosecutor, right? Like he's I think like Trump's doing this in steroids, but the legal system was what was being used to try and slow Trump's return to office politically. We have to acknowledge that. That's not a good thing for the legal system. That was a tool, maybe a good thing politically if you're a Democrat, but it's not a good thing for the legal system. So I think there's like that political set of answers. But then there's a technology set of answers, which is that technology companies ignore the law. They do what I call, you talked about pulling up to the stop sign and stopping. In California, we have something called the California stop or California roll for people who like sushi, right? You pull up to the stop sign, you look around, and if there's nobody there and it's safe, you just keep going. You don't actually do a full stop. And tech companies have been doing that since inception. And the problem for everybody competing with tech companies is if you're racing them and you're stopping at the stop sign, like you're going to die. You're in that race. Like you're not going to win, right? You're going to die. I mean, as a company, you'll die. You're not going to win the race, right? And so I think we're in a world where people are willing to pay the fine if they get in trouble. I mean, Uber ran a phenomenal strategy doing this against taxi cartels.
It doesn't hurt them that much. It's like, okay. It's like, because first of all, it's unlikely you get caught. If you do get caught, it's not that big a deal financially, why? Yeah. Financial wise.
Well, you pay for it later. I've got a NASCAR saying that if you ain't cheating, you ain't racing.
Well, and I think AI, tech ends up enabling this a lot more because the rules are gray, right? This isn't about, you're not necessarily breaking the law. Like if I go
might
tomorrow,
not even have law about it,
Exactly. So if I go tomorrow and say,
it's very, unclear.
It's completely unclear. So if I say tomorrow, like, I built a robot lawyer, right? We saw Do Not Pay get in trouble for saying they built a robot lawyer, but it's not clear that it was like illegal to build a robot lawyer, right? Like it's not obvious that that's clear. There are some rules about, there are people who will come after you and threaten you legally if you do it, but it's not clear that that's like an illegal thing to do. And I think it's the same thing with a lot of the AI regulations. Like if you look at Europe's AI Act, where it's like you can only use AI in these particular purposes. And it's like, okay, cool. Well, it's going to take you 5 years to implement that. So how much money can I make in 5 years by bypassing that? And then when you find me, like, I'll pay you or I will have gone bankrupt. So I think I'm not advocating law breaking, right? But I think that mindset undermines rule of law too. And I think, frankly, I write about this in the book. We're experiencing this on a local level as well. I mean, I don't know how it is in Houston, but in Los Angeles or New York, if I want to go get toothpaste at CVS or Target, it's in a glass box. I have to ring a bell and somebody has to unlock my toothpaste for me as if I'm buying jewelry, right? And, that's because people are shoplifting and the law's not being enforced. And so, you have another explanation for it. The law's not being enforced for a variety of reasons, some good, some bad, when it comes to shoplifting, but it further reinforces the sense that the law is not to be respected, right? And that actually the company can't assume the law will be implemented. They have to build a glass case. They lose sales. I mean, I have friends who tell me, I walk into Target and if I ring the bell, if they don't come fast enough, I order it on Amazon. That's what they tell me. And then I'll just get it tomorrow because I don't want to wait here for 12 minutes, right? And I think they're losing sales because the government's not enforcing shoplifting laws, an example. So we're experiencing this from a variety of different directions, but that erosion in rule of law is pretty significant. And it's rising to the constitutional level here where, the president is issuing executive orders that don't have any, Congress is basically saying, we'll look the other way, do what you want. I'm like, that's fine. Or maybe they're okay with it. Maybe they're not, but Congress is not that involved. So the only vehicle is to go to court. And suddenly the court, you effectively have judicial lawmaking because the court has to decide, Trump issued 1,000 executive orders and courts have to piece through all of them. Like, that's not really the way that the political
They're
system
not
is
prepared.
designed.
I mean, they've been overwhelmed with litigation for years. And now this on top of that, they're not able to handle it in a timely fashion.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that and sort of not playing by the rules. So, you've written that the intersection of legal and tech, some things are going to begin to manifest themselves maybe as early as this year. So large volumes of automated lawsuits, deep fakes. And I'll say this is kind of against trend because most people are not saying this, but the loss of jobs for knowledge workers.
You shut your mouth.
I know.
Well,
I know. So can you elaborate on how and why that's going to happen? And, are there any opportunities? Is there a silver lining that comes out of this?
Sure. Well, I'm happy to talk about the loss of jobs for knowledge workers and lawyers because we're on a podcast and I don't have to worry about getting to the exit of the conference room as I exit stage.
Exactly.
But, let's start with this broader idea about the weaponization of AI in the legal system. So I had a piece in Harvard Business Review with my co-founder, Steve Heitkamp, talking about how legal risk is going to look more like cyber risk in the next few years because of automated spam-like lawsuits that can be filed. And I had my own experience, where AI enabled me to challenge something I would not have otherwise challenged. I've had a couple of experiences. One, I got in a car accident. Emergency room diagnosed me with a concussion. Doctor diagnosed me again with a concussion. The person at the scene who hit the car said that they took responsibility. So I mailed this stuff to the insurance company. It was like, hey, I got a concussion. And they write me back a letter saying, we determined you didn't have a concussion. It's like, well, thank you, claims handler, who's not a doctor, but I know I did, and my doctor knows I did. I don't really want to sue you because I want to work with insurance companies. I build software, but this doesn't sit right. So I wonder if I can use AI to do this. And I found an AI personal injury lawyer, ZAF Legal, regulated out of Utah, and I went to them and I punched in the details of the case, and I generated a demand letter in a form that an insurance company has to respond to with all the facts of my case, and I sent it to them, and suddenly they negotiated with me. And it's a very specific, unique example. But when it was as easy as me pushing a button to respond instead of me being helpless, I responded. That's the big takeaway. It's less that they then engaged. It's that I probably couldn't have been bothered to really go deep on this, nor do I want to invest resources or personal reputation in doing it. When I just have to push a button, when I can carry my favorite legal attacks on my phone and I just push a button, flight's delayed, push a button, I'm making a claim, right? I saw, I'm in a coffee shop and I feel like I was discriminated against. Push a button, make a claim, right? It's like when you can start to do that, not only will you do that, but your competitors will do that to you. And I think that that's where this starts to get really interesting. It's not hard to imagine scenarios where if it cost me nothing to back everybody who exited my competitor in filing lawsuits against them, I might do that. Like, I'm not me personally, but if I were like a big corporation that wanted to do that, I could do that. We see this with mass arbitrations. So we saw DoorDash and Samsung and Amazon all get hit with tens of thousands of arbitrations in one day, right? The whole point of those arbitration clauses is to make sure that doesn't happen to you as a company, and suddenly it did. Some of that was tech-driven. There are companies that use technology to do that. So, I think we're going to be in a world where companies are going to start to see a flood of claims, mostly frivolous like spam, but some that are real. And you're going to need effectively like a spam guard that catches the good stuff so you know what's good. And so I think those tools are going to be really important. Litigation management, that type of stuff is going to be really important for companies to implement. That creates a world of legal work being done by AIs, right? And so you raise this question about like, am I optimistic on some level about the future for knowledge workers? I think knowledge workers have a broad future. They're just going to have to adapt. And the problem is knowledge workers aren't good at they're not used to that type of being forced by the market to adapt in the same way. So, I saw like a really nasty meme as federal government employees were being fired that said, hey, federal government employees, you told all the white collar workers they should just retrain to be coders. Now it's your turn, right? And it's kind of like, on some level, all of us in the professions have sort of been like, oh, okay, people are doing stuff that can be automated. Like they should upskill, right? Well, now that's coming for you. And I think that that's pretty challenging for law firms. To me, I think that doesn't mean you necessarily like have less billing or you're a less successful business or you have less, even necessarily less lawyers, but it is that they're going to start to have to replace what can be automated with other stuff they can do. I think strategic advice becomes really attractive for law firms because they already have all the confidentiality and privilege. They know everything about all the businesses. So I would much rather get political advice from someone covered by privilege than political advice from someone who isn't. And a lot of companies do run their political stuff through the legal department for that reason. Law firms can begin to can amplify their capabilities in that regard. The law firm model and equity model doesn't necessarily reward the political consultant who joins and can't be a partner because they can't own part of the firm because they're not a lawyer. But I think the firms as a whole have a future. But look, my view on Javon's paradox, which is usually like what everyone just says, they just kind of like flatly assert like, oh, well, when it becomes easier to do legal work, there'll be more legal work and therefore there'll be more work for lawyers. It's like net, that may be true. But the distributional consequences may be for the next 5 years, a whole bunch of people don't have a job. And that becomes really problematic, right? And so if I tell you in 10 years, there will be more, there'll be 3 million lawyers in America instead of whatever it is, 1.5 or something, 1.3, right? Like that might be true, but getting from here to there is going to have distributional consequences that are really painful.
Yeah. Well, don't underestimate the Bar Association with throwing the monkey wrench in progress. Because I'm thinking like, is there going to be some type of anti-slap style regulation on these AI generated lawsuits, right? And so, I mean, I guess in way we can't get out of our own way sometimes. I'm not sure that's going to help in the situation, but man, I can see the rules and the Bar Association court fighting this.
They will fight. They always do whenever they are at risk.
So what happens when it's like one registered lawyer in Arizona using all the AI to make themselves like the most superhuman lawyer you've ever seen filing all of these cases, and they're technically complying with the rules, and they've figured out how to create, a troll farm effectively that enables them,
I was
right?
thinking.
Yeah. And so I think it's this thing where like the law will still have the veneer of being human. I don't, even if it's automated, it's just it's a force multiplier, but it's going to be very hard to figure out what's been generated by AI and what hasn't. Like today you can do that by like reading the language and understanding that AI talks kind of in like very stilted tones, but that'll get better. And so it'll be hard to block it because you won't know. It's like, could I block every inbound sales email that I get offering me development talent? Like, like my spam guard's pretty good because it usually uses the same language, but a lot of stuff gets through. Yeah. And because people know the area.
I noticed there was a feature on one of the AI tools that I'm using that says, do you want to increase the amount of anti-AI identification language, right? And so, yeah, it's.
I mean, even with prompts, you could do that. It's, make that more casual. Make it
sound like it's not. Yeah, make it not sound like you. So, Sean, I want to talk to you. You've got this phrase that you use called front stabbing. And it kind of reminded me, like when I was a kid, I moved from Illinois to Mississippi. One of the things that someone mentioned to me was like, well, at least here, where everyone stands, they're not going to, stab you in the back. They're just going to stab you right in the front. And we're seeing more of that, I think, especially, with our governments. I think we're seeing it more in our kind of approach, how we're addressing business. So I'm, curious.
That whole meeting with the Ukraine where that's all publicized as opposed to kind of having that happen behind closed doors.
Yeah, and maybe in a way that's a good thing. Sometimes, most of the times it's a bad thing. But I'm just curious on what kind of effect do you think this has on the legal tech industry and even things like lobbying. How does this work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I use the phrase front stabbing. I recalled a management meeting at a prior job where a colleague just started screaming, like, where I come from, we stab people in the front. And I always remembered that. And,
That's great they said that.
And Anthony Scaramucci, who was Trump's press lead for 11 days in the first term, went on Dr. Phil of all shows and talked about how he's a front stabber and, how he had gotten stabbed in the front by Trump, basically. And so when I started seeing these lists Trump was putting together of like, you're an undocumented immigrant, like register, like sign up for my list. It's like, these are lists of people that we can just, wipe away effectively from the country. And you've seen it in the brazen politics. And you mentioned some examples of it with allies or former allies or purported allies, right? So to me, I think there's an interesting question about what this means for technology and for business. I think what it means politically first is that, yes, everybody may know where they stand, but it also makes politics an actual knife fight. And that's a little different than it's been before. So there's always been sort of smoke-filled rooms and back dealings and all that kind of stuff. But when you actually literally can politically trot out everybody that is against you and knock them down, that's what you see in emerging markets with militaristic leaders. That's not what you see in democracies where the goal is everybody's representatives of the population. They should be bargaining and trying to figure out which direction we're going. Now, that's not been the way American politics has been for a while, but it's notionally where we should be going, and going a different direction. It's pretty damaging because it begets the next administration to come in and do the exact same thing, right? The glass has been broken. You can do that. When you think about it I'll actually share an interesting example. So, this question on transparency is a really important one. Is it better just to know? So a friend of mine, and I wrote about this on LinkedIn yesterday, was holding a conference in Florida, and the Trump administration got in touch and said, would you all like to meet President Trump? And they said, there is a menu of options you have. And they said, for $1 million, you can have a 1-hour meeting with President Trump. For $750,000, you can meet Vice President Vance. And for $500,000, you can meet Elon Musk, right? I'm not joking. This is like a CEO told me. They're presented with this list of options and they declined not because of the money, but that's not something they were going to do. But I raised the question okay, you first hear that and you're like, wow, that's super slimy and gross. And what is that? Or at least I did. But then you stop and say is this the way it's always been? This is just we're now seeing the transaction. If I donated $1 million to any presidential candidate and I call them and say, I want to be ambassador to whatever country, my odds of being ambassador to that country are very high. Right. And so I think, to me, there's a question of is this the way politics has always been? We can now just see it. And so does sunlight disinfect because people are wow, this is gross, or I don't like this. We'll see. From a business and a legal tech perspective. So I think the onset of both technology to push your agenda and attack your foes at the same time that politics gets nastier is a much more pugnacious environment. So there's been, a number of different researchers. John Ney is a fellow at Stanford, Bruce Schneier, who's a cybersecurity expert, have written about creating robot lobbyists that can actually do the work. And they've done a lot of, testing of this. So imagine a world where an AI can detect the one word you need to change in a law to give you maximum benefit, and then automatically send letters to Congress saying, change and to but in this legislation. Nobody will notice, and we will back you at your next reelection, right? Like, that's a really interesting world to live in. You can argue that like small companies would potentially have an outsized voice in that type of world because they can use technology to give themselves a voice. You can also argue big companies with bigger budgets will have better AI. And you can also argue that if you're getting a whole bunch of spam, the government will stop paying attention. And so I think that, there's some really interesting reflections. But when business and politics have the gloves off, it rarely rewards the disadvantaged or the smaller players. And so I think that's, you move towards a world of consolidation in this type of environment. And that's why you saw the tech leaders coming out and saying, sure, we'll give you that $1 million. Like, yeah, we'll be at inauguration, right? Yeah. Why wouldn't, if my job is to deliver value to shareholders, like there's a good return on investment. And someone joked in response to my post on this, I can already see the tech startups building in the $1 million line item in their go-to-market for meeting with President Trump. And, it's not clear to me that many venture capitalists would tell you that that's a bad investment. It might be a better investment than $1 million on a domain name.
Well, before we leave, we want to talk about Hence Global, and that's what you call a geolegal product. So it's an AI-powered platform. It digests global news for political, legal, and operational impact, and specifically, related to you and your business and your clients. So tell us a little bit more about how that works and what the benefits are for those who use it.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this product, and we're seeing a huge amount of uptake. We're in soft launch right now. This is probably the first time I'm really amplifying it publicly. And what we're seeing is law firms coming on, using the software to digest what's going on in the world, to understand how their clients are being impacted by politics, and see it all from their perspective. So the intellectual property lawyer at your firm will see a very different view of what matters politically and legally than the employment lawyer at your firm.
They set it themselves? Is that how it works?
So the system does a lot automatically, but when you put in your job, you have the opportunity to put in a sentence or two about the types of things you care about, and that can change. You can change that. But the system serves up completely different news for different types of lawyers within the organization. So in effect, it's mass customization, right? It's the ability to get something that's just for you without a whole lot of effort. What's most exciting about it is the world is filled with noise. Like, there's huge amounts of news every day. Those Google alerts are great, but you can't read them because most of the time it's stuff you didn't care about. So the system knows you, it surfaces what matters to you, and it'll do an on-the-fly analysis of how that affects you or your business. So if you're a law firm and you see the fact that there is a political event that's occurred, you can generate an analysis of where it presents opportunities for you to reach out to your clients. So it'll look at it and say, this is an opportunity for your disputes practice. This is an opportunity for your intellectual property business, all tied to what's happened in the news. So law firms are looking at this to enhance their marketing, their client outreach, their situational awareness. But it's not just law firms, right? In-house teams are using it as well. We're actually rolling it out to founders. Like in a lot of companies where people don't even have legal or government affairs, they still care about the law. And so while they wouldn't have paid $100,000 for that advice, they'd pay $1, right? I have a business in 4 countries. I'm a founder. I don't have a huge amount of money to pay for advisory work, but if I could pay $1 and understand how the politics in all those places are affecting my business, I'll pay that $1. I might pay $10. And so my job is to discover the price they'll pay. But I can tell you, for anyone listening, you can pay about a third less if you use the promo code GEEK when you register for global.hence.ai, which is where you can find the product, and give it a shot. There's a free trial, so it's not, you're not committed, but really the product's been designed to be purchasable by an individual practitioner. So, to take us full circle to the beginning of this episode, where lawyers are swiping credit cards and buying ChatGPT, that's our vision for this product, right? An individual partner wants better situational awareness. They invest in their future. It's the cost of taking a client out to dinner. It's the cost of what some of them charge for 1 hour of advice. You get a year of it. They swipe the credit card and then they're better informed and hopefully able to earn 100 times that in the advice that they give their clients.
Well, Sean, we're at the point now where we ask our guests to pull out their crystal ball and peer into the future for us. So, if looking into your crystal ball and looking ahead, what are you seeing? The trends that you think will have the most significant impact on, emerging technologies and business and society over the next few years, and how should organizations and individuals what should they be doing to shift for that right now?
So, look, I think it's clear that there's a potential scenario where we live in a world of abundance, and our job is to figure out how to distribute that abundance. And that's not an easy political question to solve. So all those out of work lawyers we talked about, like they still have car notes and second mortgages and nanny payments and things like that. Like, does universal basic income cover that or not cover that, right? Like, a world of abundance is not necessarily a world of simple answers, but it's a better scenario than many others. And I am very optimistic about the productivity gains from a lot of these products and about how they're going to barrel through all the regulation holding them back. And it's going to be nasty, and there'll be some casualties in the process of trying to figure out like where the guardrails are. But ultimately, I think society will be on a much better footing. But the big lesson, and I write about this, the book's called Unruly, both because the world is volatile, but also because the rules are shifting and eroding. And the big kind of takeaway, I have a whole chapter on tech and job replacement. The big takeaway in that chapter is that you could move towards that like more socialist UBI scenario, or you could move towards authoritarianism, because technology enables a lot of surveillance. It enables the use of data. And if you look at the Chinese model, where, if I say the wrong thing on social media, I might not be able to get a mortgage, like that is technologically feasible in a place like the US. And I think people are more worried about it today than they've been in the past. The reason I highlight that is because that has some very real implications for businesses that have to navigate through that transition. My advice would be, think about where you're going to implement these tools and how you're going to protect your staff. Because if you're going to if you're going to replace staff with AI, let's front stab about that. Let's be vocal, right? But offer retraining, offer to fund it. AT&T, when it did its big digital transformation, spent $1 billion funding education for out of work employees to upskill and continue to work with the firm. They didn't want to lose the firm's specific knowledge. If you're not, if you take a decision, we're not going to replace workers with AI for the next 3 to 5 years, say that, commit to that, because you will be a magnet for human talent. Everyone will want to work for you because they'll have job security. So part of this, I think, is thinking about the future scenarios and trying to take a bit of a medium-term perspective on really what are your values as a company and where do you want to be, and take a position on it, right? You can't hide. If you go pretend you're not implementing AI and replacing jobs, then you say, oh, sorry, like suddenly we have 20% less staff. Like the rest of the staff's going to have anxiety about that, right? You have to be a little transparent about your thought process too.
All right. Well, Sean West from Hence Global and the author of Unruly, Fighting Back When Politics, AI, and Law Upend the Rule of Business. Hey, thank you very much for coming in and talking with us. This has been fun.
This has been
Absolutely
fascinating.
Pleasure. This is the most fun I've had all week.
And thanks to all of you, our listeners, for taking the time to listen to the Geek and Review podcast. If you enjoyed the show, share it with a colleague. We'd love to hear from you, so reach out to us on social media. You can find us on LinkedIn and Blue Sky.
Yeah. And Sean, we'll make sure that we put the links on the show notes, but what's the best way for listeners to reach out and learn more about your book or about you?
Yeah, so if you go to hence.ai, you can learn about the product and you can sign up from there. The book Unruly is available on Amazon. It's available everywhere. And if you want to reach out to me, follow my Substack, geolegal.substack.com, and reply to any weekly email you get. There's a human on the other side named Sean who will write back to you.
Wow, that's interesting. A human on the other side. Who would have think?
Unique. And as always, everyone, the music you hear is from Jerry Davis' Sicka. So thank you very much, Jerry.
Thanks, Jerry. All right. See you guys later.